Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning in with us as we journey through Acts over the next 28 days. Today is really exciting because, as you've heard already, the story of Acts is really the story of the early Christian church and how it came to be after Jesus' death and resurrection. So today we're talking about Acts chapter 3. So if you want to follow along, that's what we're talking about today, Acts chapter 3. But before we dive in, I want to tell you about my new favorite film. My new favorite film is a Disney film, and it's called Encanto. It's a story that takes place in Colombia of this family who's been given a miracle. And in this miracle, all of the family members have wonderful gifts. They have wonderful gifts and they're really incredible. One of the family members is super strong, and one of the family members can hear a pin drop. One of the family members can shapeshift. They all have these wonderful gifts that they share with their community, very similarly to how the gifts of the early church was all focused on how they could serve their community. Well, in the movie Encanto, something is happening to the miracle. Suddenly, this miracle isn't working the way that it used to work, and people's gifts aren't working the way they used to work. And it so happens that one of the characters, one of the members of the family, her gift is to create beautiful blooms and blossoms of flowers. And everyone in the family knows her as this perfect poster child for all that the Encanto has brought to them. She's perfect in every way. She's graceful. And what happens to her name is Isabella. What happens to her is that her whole life revolves around this perfection. It revolves around being perfect for her community and for her family. Her whole purpose in her family is to be this perfect child. And it starts to weigh on her. It starts to weigh heavily on her because she feels so much pressure to behave perfectly that she gives up her own desires, her own goals in order to be this perfect person. She even sings a song about how hard the perfection is weighing on her. And her sister, Mirabel Madrigal, who has glasses like mine and is the heroine of the movie, she comes in and reminds Isabella that perfection isn't what is needed, but sharing her gifts is needed, and relieves her of this expectation, this heavy load that Isabella is carrying with perfection. Well, in the early church, and what we see in Acts 3 is we see a group and a community that is so weighed down by living perfect faith. You see, before Jesus came, there were laws that told us exactly how faith was supposed to look, exactly how we were supposed to live our day-to-day lives in order to glorify God. And the weight was heavy on people. The weight was heavy on people, and it was impossible to live up to the standards that were set. And so what happens when Jesus comes, as we know, he relieves us from the burden of these laws, but he sets forth something new. He says that instead of being bound to these laws, instead we are bound to serve God and serve our neighbors, to love God and love our neighbors. Well, this is pretty radical. And here in Acts chapter 3, we are met with the disciples of Jesus who are set forth to go and share the good news of Jesus Christ, but also the skeptical community that they live in. Here in chapter 3, we see Peter and John, and they're going out to tell the good news of Jesus Christ. And they go into a temple and they see a man who is a crippled beggar. They see a man who's a crippled beggar, and they heal him. They heal him, and he stands up and walks. He gets strength in his ankles and in his feet, and he gets up and walks. And Peter and John celebrate with their whole community. They celebrate that through their faith in Jesus, this man is able to be healed. But the leaders in the temple are still skeptical, and they're concerned with what they see as the lies that Peter and John are telling the community. They're concerned, and so they take these disciples, Peter and John, they take them, and they don't know what to do. They want to punish them, but they are not sure because the whole community is celebrating that this wonderful healing has taken place. And yet the leaders of the temple are concerned because they're not quite sure if they believe that or not. if they believe in the power of Jesus. It's this really wild moment. But Peter says something important. Peter then preaches to the people, and he says something that I think we can all resonate with. He says, here these temple leaders are obsessed with doing things just right and living perfect lives dedicated to the Lord. And here we think that being perfect is what brings us into relationship with God and creates that righteousness. But what Jesus has taught us is it's not about what we do, but it's about what God has done. It's about what God has done through Jesus in the death and resurrection that we are brought into relationship with God. It's not about what we do, it's about what God has done. Peter says this loudly and proudly within the temple. The temple leaders are left confused. But it brings up such a good point and a good question that we still wrestle with today. When we think about our faith lives, sometimes I think we think about doing faith just right. We think about going to Sunday school, and we think about showing up to worship on time. We think about praying before we eat and before we go to bed. We think about doing faith just right. But Peter reminds us here that faith isn't about doing things just right or perfectly like Isabella, but it's about having faith in what God has done. So I've got some questions to leave you with today. And the first question is, where in your life do you practice perfection? Where in your life are you practicing perfection? My second question today is, when it comes to faith, instead of focusing on doing faith perfectly, I want to encourage you to wonder where God and the Spirit are moving in the community that you live in. Thanks for joining us as we journey through Acts. We're really excited for you to walk alongside us. We're going to talk about Acts chapter 4 next, so we hope that you'll tune in.